Okay, welcome everyone to Pollution-Free Cooking for the Holidays. We're really excited to have everyone join us for this, which should be a really informative and also fun webinar. While we will be talking about gas stove pollution and the health impacts that it has, and different ways to protect yourself, we'll also get to see an exciting cooking demonstration from Chef Chris Galarza, professional chef, who will show us how an induction stove works. But let's get kicked off. And I want to start by bringing on Commissioner Richard Trumka Jr. of the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission. Commissioner Trumka was nominated by President Biden and confirmed to the Senate to a 7-year term at the commission, and began serving as a commissioner on December 2nd, 2021, a little more than a year into his term now. Prior to joining the commission, Mr. Trumka served as general counsel and staff director of the United States House Subcommittee on Economic and Consumer Policy in the Committee on Oversight and Reform. And he's no stranger to consumer protection. He focused his work on protecting the public health and protecting children, including drafting reports on the presence of toxic heavy metals in baby foods that led to government reform, on children's car booster seats that stopped manufacturers from marketing products for children who did not weigh enough to safely use them. And his years-long investigation and oversight of the e-cigarette industry helped bring significant reforms to the previously unregulated products. We're so glad to have him here to talk about the CPSC's work on protecting consumers and on what the CPSC is looking at in terms of gas stoves and gas stove pollution. And I'll turn it over to Commissioner Trumka now.
Matt, thank you so much. And a big thank you to PIRG, not just for holding this event, but also for being such a powerful voice for consumers. You know, when I hear about an emerging product safety issue, I often call PIRG, and without fail, the policy experts here are either already tracking it or they dive headfirst in the topic with a level of passion that's unique even among consumer advocates. So for all those on the call today who are members or supporters of PIRG, just know that you couldn't have selected a better megaphone for your policy concerns. I can personally attest that these folks here have earned the respect of policy makers in the federal government. As for gas stoves, you know, they're in the center of your home's gathering place, and yet they can emit toxic chemicals. Things like nitrogen dioxide and fine particulate matter. And the buildup of those chemicals from gas stoves can create an air quality issue inside your home that's worse than what EPA allows for outdoor air. So before I continue, and I can't stress this enough, if you do have to use a gas stove, please be sure that the space is appropriately ventilated. And I'm not talking about just flipping on the exhaust hoods that people have in their kitchens, because we've done the research. And the majority of exhaust hoods that you see in homes are purely cosmetic. And the hood doesn't actually connect to a vent outside of your home, which means it really doesn't do anything except make an obnoxious sound when you turn it on. Unfortunately, the vast majority of Americans have no idea that every time they cook, they could be subjecting themselves and their loved ones to toxic chemicals, including children who are more vulnerable to effects like developing asthma and lifelong respiratory disease. Also, unfortunately, the chemicals aren't only emitted when you have the burner on, because gas stoves can leak chemicals when they're turned off too. Now, the most studied health risk of nitrogen dioxide is respiratory disease. And multiple studies in peer-reviewed journals find that even short-term exposure to nitrogen dioxide can increase your risk of death from respiratory and cardiovascular disease. Longer exposures can induce asthma and increase susceptibility to respiratory infections. Now, this is particularly concerning for small children. I have two. And with all the bugs that are constantly floating around their preschool and elementary school, the last thing I want for my kids and for yours is to make them more susceptible to infection. And the idea that cooking for them could actually be making them sick makes me feel ill myself. And it's not just young kids we need to be worried about, because we've seen disturbing new research finding a link between these airborne chemicals and dementia. One study published in January this year in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences found that 2 airborne chemicals were strongly associated with an increased risk of dementia in women over age 74. nitrogen dioxide, and fine particulate matter. And those seem to be the two chemicals most heavily emitted from gas stoves. A second report in the Public Library of Science Medicine found that lowering levels of these pollutants delayed the rate of cognitive decline by 1.6 years. So at least that's encouraging. And it means that it's not too late to change to a different cooking setup, because that can mean years of life being stolen from older Americans and the people who love them. That's why I think we need to be talking about regulating gas stoves, whether that's drastically improving emissions or banning gas stoves entirely. And I think we ought to keep that possibility of a ban in mind as you follow along, because it's a powerful tool in our toolbox and it's a real possibility here, particularly because there seems to be readily available alternatives already on the market, as we'll see shortly in the cooking demonstration. So by March, the Consumer Product Safety Commission will issue a formal request for information from the public on the hazards associated with gas stoves. We'll be asking for proposed solutions. Now, the idea that a federal agency is crowdsourcing this information might sound odd, but it's actually a great thing because we have a shoestring budget. We are definitively the most chronically underfunded agency in the federal government. And one of the ways we work around this is by mining the public domain, and specifically the knowledge of consumer advocates like yourselves for the science and solutions that we need to support regulations. So please submit comments in response to that request for information. I'll link to it on my Twitter account as soon as the comment period's open, and I'll be asking my friends at PIRG to share that link as well. That's how we get this critical information in front of the agency as we consider solutions. Now, this public request for information is the first step in what could be a long journey towards regulating gas stoves, but I'm here to tell you that with enough public pressure, it doesn't have to be. We could get a regulation on the books before this time next year. It's absolutely possible. Just because the federal government isn't known for moving quickly doesn't mean that it can't happen. And my number one goal as a commissioner is to push our agency farther and faster than it's ever moved to protect consumers. And your voice can make all the difference here. So please, one, spread the word about this hidden hazard before you gather with family and friends for the holidays. And two, please keep a lookout for that, for our agency's public request for information. I hope you all have a wonderful holiday season, and I hope that you make sure that the space you gather in later this month with family and friends is safe from hidden hazards. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Trumka, and we will be sure to share that RFI far and wide when available, and we're looking forward to helping the agency any way we can. I realize I committed a webinar faux pas and did not introduce myself before introducing Commissioner Trumka. My name is Matt Cassell, and I'm US PIRG's Environment Campaigns Director, and I'll be your host today. But now I want to turn it over to Dr. Steph Lee, who I'm excited to have on to talk to all of you. Dr. Lee is a pediatrician and an advocate who empowers young people to pursue their passions, who educates parents on the latest advice on raising healthy children, and elevates children's health and preventative medicine ideas into public policy. She is exactly the kind of person we want taking care of our kids' health. She's an expert who is driven and dedicated to making the world a healthier place. So thanks for joining us, Dr. Lee, and I'll turn it over to you if you're ready to go.
Yes, thanks so much. Let me share my screen here. All right, so we're going to start off just talking about how indoor air pollution affects childhood asthma. So let me make sure I can. Sorry, I have like 3 screens up. Okay, all right. So just a little bit of what we're going to talk about, talking about air pollution in general, and then also particularly about gas stoves, right? The whole topic of our conversation here today. And then a little bit about children's unique physiology and why it matters so much and why children are a vulnerable population when it comes to indoor air pollution. Commissioner Trumka already went a little bit about the research, but we'll dive in a little bit more about in terms of children, how it really affects their health, a little bit about social justice, and then briefly solutions that you can consider and what you can do at home. So just a broad overview, sources of air pollution. So we were talking about indoor and outdoor, right? So today we're talking about indoor pollution, air pollution, which comes from, wood or gas stoves, right? I just wanted to point out, there are other sources of air pollution, so we don't forget, the broader picture for indoor air pollution, tobacco use, asbestos, of course, mold even as well. And then outdoor, you're talking about the other things such as fugitive dust, urban areas with particulate matter as well from cars, and rural areas from like agricultural and also coals and power plants as well. So we're focusing on a very small part of what we contributes to indoor air pollution. So when it comes to stoves and indoor air pollution, what exactly is the issue, right? So ambient air pollution is harmful to children, especially indoor air pollution, because burning natural gas does create nitrogen dioxide, particulate matter, carbon monoxide, and other byproducts that contribute to air pollution and are lung irritants. So they can lead to respiratory issues as well. The EPA had written back in 2019 already that such exposures over short periods can aggravate respiratory illnesses. So things like asthma, which is a big thing, especially in kids, that we often see, very common, unfortunately, and also respiratory symptoms. So things just like coughing, wheezing, difficulty breathing, and can even lead to hospital admissions and visits to emergency rooms. They've found, particularly with nitrogen dioxide, that can contribute to the development of asthma, as we'll talk about in a little bit. And so in general, children and the elderly are generally at greater risk for some of these effects just because of their physiology. So what makes kids so different, right? So we like to say as pediatricians, children are not just little adults. They're they're unique in terms of their development. And so at baseline, they do have a higher breathing rate just in general. And that's normal for them, right? And so because of that, they take in greater air per kilogram of body weight. So because of the increased breathing rates and also greater air intake, they receive higher doses of pollutants. This is indoor, outdoor, any type really, because of their unique physiology. As they get older, of course, then they go closer to adult physiology, but that really doesn't happen until maybe late adolescence or even 18 or older or so. So it's really something we talk about in terms of pollution is that we really have to protect children because they're already at an increased risk just for the fact that there are children. Also, and the last thing is they may be closer in proximity, right, to pollutants because they're at eye level or height with gas stoves and things. So that may be something that because of proximity also puts them at higher risk. So going a little bit more, into the research aspect. So I'm breaking it down kind of into the gas cooking stove exposure and the indoor nitrogen oxide exposure, because there's been a lot of research specifically just with nitrogen dioxide. So children living in a home with a gas cooking stove do have a 42% increased risk of current asthma. So having the diagnosis of asthma, they found that association. And as well as having a 24 increased lifetime risk of asthma, meaning that they at some points were diagnosed with asthma during the survey time that they looked at. And in addition, in terms of nitrogen dioxide exposure, they found that increasing indoor nitrogen dioxide levels actually increase the risk of having wheezing currently at the time of the study when they did it. So this study was actually a meta-analysis. So that looks like a bunch of different studies together and looked at 41 studies to kind of see in total what the different risks were associated with the gas cooking and the indoor nitrogen dioxide. It was based off of the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey. So that's a population-based study that the US does every 2 years. And so they take they talk about health and nutrition status of adults and children, and then also do interviews and physical exams. So it's pretty thorough in terms of the information that they gather. And so this study kind of looked overall at not only the questionnaire in terms of asthma, but also current wheeze, and they even looked as well at lung function as well. And then they did find that in homes with gas cooking stoves, if they had poor ventilation, then like they didn't have exhaust fans or anything like that, that even led to lower lung function compared to families that had exhaust fans as well. Even though, as we heard, that may not be the best solution, it's still one potential solution if that's the only thing that you can do. So as we said, really it does affect not only current asthma, but also symptoms of wheezing and also lifetime asthma. So it's certainly something to consider, because that's such a huge, if you've ever had any kids with asthma or know anybody who has asthma, it's a very hard disease to manage sometimes, especially if there's a lot of triggers and things that can cause you to have flares and or asthma attacks. I did want to note that most of my presentation obviously is about pediatrics and kids because I am a pediatrician, but they have found too that nitrogen dioxide can affect asthmatic adults. So even in adults who do have asthma, it can be a trigger as well for attacks, and even affect kind of the same spectrum of diseases, something called chronic obstructive pulmonary disease or COPD. So that is generally almost like an adult version of asthma in a sense, that you have lung issues that can be that can be triggered with irritation. And so that is also something that can be affected with by nitrogen dioxide gas. And then in terms of, I mentioned a little bit, but the poor ventilation issues, this can also have a negative effect on lung function. So this also was based on the NHANES study, which is the National Health and Nutrition Exam Survey. But they did find not only an effect on lung function, but also a higher odds of asthma, wheeze, which is the symptom of asthma, and then bronchitis, like an infection as well. So one other thing I wanted to mention, because we said mainly nitrogen dioxide is one of the main things with gas stoves that you would talk about, but carbon monoxide also can be an issue as well. Carbon monoxide is an odorless, colorless gas, and it is a very potent air pollutant. It just takes a little bit before you can have carbon monoxide poisoning. And it is so toxic because it replaces oxygen carriers in the blood. So it can affect children and adults, obviously. Symptoms could be, blurry vision, headaches, nausea, vomiting. They're very what we call non-specific symptoms, right? You know you feel sick, but you're not quite sure why. And especially since you can't smell or see carbon monoxide if it's there, that's why it can be so dangerous. Sometimes in the most common source of carbon monoxide poisoning is gas fueled like space heaters in the home, but certainly if gas stoves are not functioning correctly, they can also be a source of carbon monoxide buildup, and also if there's not very good ventilation as well. If a child has signs of carbon monoxide poisoning, it's always good to, take them right away out into the fresh air and call 911, just because the oxygen therapy is the main treatment for carbon monoxide poisoning. And so this is one thing where it's not a long time exposure issue per se. It would, unless it's a very, very small, gas leak or something like that. But generally it's just a risk that you can have with gas stoves in general, that if it's very toxic. If you're able to just eliminate this risk at all, that would be great, right? And then the last thing here I wanted to touch on as well is that it is a social justice issue, right? So Black and Hispanic people are exposed to more air pollution than they produce. So we call it climate disadvantage, right? And so unfortunately, just lower income households also may be at higher risk of exposure as the pollution more readily reaches dangerous levels in small spaces. And smaller homes are more susceptible to higher levels of gas stove pollution just because of, say, cramped apartments, insufficient ventilation, that kind of thing. And so they found that unfortunately, a Black child in the US is just in general not related, say, to gas stoves, but in terms of asthma, the burden is so much stronger. They are 8 times more likely to die from an asthma attack than a white child. And so they experience 138,000 asthma attacks each year attributable to air pollutants, actually. So specifically due to air pollutants, they have a higher rate than white children with asthma. So trying to figure out ways to prevent that, especially in the protect them in a way that doesn't put the burden on them individually, but from a social and government standpoint, it would be imperative. One particular study I want to point out, sorry, I didn't put the reference here, but you can ask me for it. They recruited 150 children from age 2 to 6 in Baltimore, looked at physician-diagnosed asthma in an inner city Baltimore, Maryland, and they monitored indoor air over a 72-hour period in the children's bedrooms at baseline, at 3 months and 6 months, and they completed, asthma symptoms as well. And they found that in the presence of a gas stove and the use of a space heater or oven stove for heat were all associated independently with higher nitrogen dioxide concentrations. And then those higher indoor nitrogen dioxide concentrations were associated with increased asthma symptoms in all the kids. And those were predominantly African-American in the households, and about half were in lower income thresholds. They said 42% were from households with annual income less than $25,000. So just another thing to point out that it really is something that affects say interstate children, low income households, and our Black Americans. So in order to try to improve their health as well as all of our healths, it's important to figure out a solution to remove this risk as best as we can. So some solutions, which I'll briefly go over, are from a healthcare standpoint, of course. I do a lot of talks and involved with the medical organizations like the American Academy of Pediatrics, the Physicians for Social Responsibility, or PSR, PA, to really talk to our healthcare professionals about counseling patients, and especially our asthma patients, about looking at risk factors within the home, right? Because like I said, when it comes to managing asthma, we see so many children with asthma, but I treat it and then they go home and they're fine. But then if there's a trigger that I can't control, right, then they're right back here, trying to get medical care. So the goal is to really try to figure out from the environmental standpoint, is there something else that we can try to help improve their lives outside of the office? Of course, community partnerships, and trying to make sure in terms of advocacy that we try to figure out solutions, whether it's, legal protections, government regulation, like we mentioned, things like that, to try to make sure that we decrease this significant risk factor for asthma triggers and respiratory illnesses. And also, I think it's important because it helps to shine a light on our disproportionately burdened communities as well, right? We want to make sure that we lift up all of our Americans as much as we can, and then also especially those who are being disproportionately impacted and unfairly so because they're not producing as much of that air pollution, as I mentioned, with the climate disadvantage. Oops, sorry, I'm going the wrong way. All right. And so lastly, just as I mentioned, prevention really is key because when it comes to asthma, the important point is that, gas stoves, they're associated with the release of air pollutants and nitrogen dioxide being a major player affecting asthma and lung function in children. So, even though you can't get rid of asthma, you can prevent triggers. And so one of the ways is, trying to help with indoor air pollution as key to managing the illness. And even if you don't have a child, right, we're talking about right before the holidays, there are benefits to try to figure out if there's better options. Because of course, I mentioned, adults also can have respiratory irritants and also COPD and the risk reduction of carbon monoxide poisoning. And with the holidays, you might have friends and family, people who do have kids as well. So over the long period, you do want to try to help decrease that risk as much as possible for everybody's health. And just making sure, that as much as we can, we do want to try to improve indoor air quality. I don't think we talk about it enough, especially in the medical community. I think it's something that we're starting to get a little bit more aware that there are things that we can try to do. But certainly this is one thing that we really need to, make people aware that it is a contributor to indoor, like gas stoves and nitrogen oxide is a contributor to indoor air pollution. Oops. All right, I do have some references on the slide, but you can contact me if you want them more as well. My email is there and I am on social media as Steph Lee MD. So you always feel free to contact me if you have any other questions or want to connect. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lee, for that really informative presentation. I think really helpful to for people to be hearing that. And getting all of that information. I want to, before we turn it over to Chef Chris, just very quickly highlight a couple of additional things. First is that I think one of the big problems here is that consumers are not always aware of all of the issues that Dr. Lee and Commissioner Trumka talked about. And that's why the CPSC is looking at ways to protect consumers. We recently did a survey of a number of retailers of major appliances, and you can see the link here. And I just want to highlight that we found that it's hard to get the information you need about the health effects in order to make an informed decision about what stove you're buying and what kind of ventilation you're installing in your home when you're purchasing a stove. And so it's really important that we take additional opportunities in order to provide this information to people so that they can make informed decisions for their families and know really what they would like, and so people can make those decisions about what they're putting in their homes. And I just want to highlight here, and one of the resources that we'll provide to people has more information on it. But if you're using a gas stove, here are just some practical solutions to minimize your risk and different ways to protect yourselves and your family. And then if you are looking at a kitchen upgrade and you are considering an electric or an induction stove, I want to highlight that the recently passed Inflation Reduction Act, which President Biden signed this fall, has some incentives and rebates for consumers, including, depending on your income, possibly up to an $840 discount on a new electric or induction stove. And then if you need to do electrical panel upgrades, in order to put in a new appliance, you can get a rebate or a tax credit of up to 30%. And there's some additional rebates available for low and moderate income consumers. So I have a link here, which we can send out as well with some more information on those. But without further ado, I want to turn it over now to Chef Chris Galarza, who is going to do a cooking demonstration for us. Chef Chris Galarza is an entrepreneur. He's an author. He's a public speaker. He's a podcaster. I definitely recommend checking out his podcast. And he's renowned for his work in kitchen electrification. He's the founder and culinary sustainability consultant for Forward Dining Solutions, which is the first and only firm dedicated to creating sustainable and efficient commercial kitchens. He's an expert in electric kitchens. He's a chef that works with clients to sustainably create kitchens that promote healthy, efficient, and equitable working conditions. He's worked on notable projects, including Chatham University's Eden Hall campus, which is the world's first fully self-sustained university campus. He's worked with Microsoft and an all-girls school. And he's also worked for several prestigious establishments, including Carnegie Mellon University and Monterey Bay of Pittsburgh. And he's worked with certified master chefs and culinary Olympians. And he now leverages that experience as an educator and consultant to get projects moving forward and leaves operators educated and prepared to run successful, efficient, and safe kitchens. And now I will turn it over to you, Chef Chris.
Matt, thank you. That was an awesome intro. Welcome, everybody. I am Chef Chris Galarza, founder of Forward Dining Solutions. And I'm really excited to be here talking to you guys about induction cooking. For those of you who don't know what induction cooking is, for starters, it's not gas, right? It's not coils that we know of, at least that we think of, that are slow and personally we all know and loathe. The truth is, induction cooking is a way of harnessing electromagnetic current to oscillate the ferromagnetic molecules within the pan to make the pan itself a heating element. So as you'll see when I'm demonstrating, put our hands all around the equipment. It's not going to burn us. Touch the handle. It's not going to burn us. So to Steph's point, when talking about children, they can come up and grab handles and not have to worry about burning themselves. So we work on schools that have pedagogies or teaching classes. We often recommend induction for obvious reasons, but also because it's a safety aspect that makes the parents feel a lot better about having their kids learn how to cook. So for starters, let's set this over here so you all can see that I'm working with a pan that we've had ice in. I want to give induction the worst possible chance of success here. So we're going to, not only that, put down a towel. So there's a barrier for the heat. So we're going to do, again, everything that we can to make this not a success. For those of you who don't know what it's like to be a professional chef, let me just, before we get started into cooking, explain a little bit about that. So when you're a chef in these environments, kitchens are very hot. We all know that. The amount of heat put out by these burners are insane. We have 30,000 BTU burners. If you have a wok in your kitchen, it's 100,000 BTUs. It's a lot of heat, and those are all open flames. So what that means is our kitchens are oftentimes in the 100 to 130 range. I can tell you stories about being a chef in Monterey Bay of Pittsburgh here, where I would have my thermometer, my chef coat read 135. And what that does to you as an individual is you are constantly trying to drink water. Yeah, Tess, she's freaking out over there. You are constantly trying to drink water to replace the moisture that you're losing, all the while having to be careful about the electrolyte balance in your body, because if you throw that off, you can get very sick. I didn't know that until I got sick. But all the while, in between these rushes we would get, we would be clamoring to go to the bathroom so we could throw up. So it's like we're running a marathon in extreme heat, working as fast as we can with things that can cut us and burn us and seriously maim us, all the while to serve our consumers food. But there's a better way of doing that. When we were at Chatham University. We did a study of the kitchen after it was open. And the week that we studied that, feel free to look it up. It's September 9th through 16th of 2019 in Gibsonia, Pennsylvania. It was anywhere from 85 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit. The perfect summer week, not a cloud in sight. It was, if you took vacation, that's the week you want to go. But in our kitchen, it never hit 74 degrees Fahrenheit. So we went from 135-degree kitchen to 74, or 72 rather. That's the difference we're talking about. And then there's also regulations that are coming down the pipe that are going to change that for the better. But for right now, this is the best way of creating kitchens that are going to allow us to cook and be comfortable while doing it. Because I can tell you from experience, from going into these spaces, you never think about being comfortable until you're in it. And then your mental health just gets so much better. We had guest-facing interactions that went through the roof. Our guest satisfaction survey scores. Our staff had less infighting. It was a much better experience, and we had no idea that it was because we were more comfortable. So let's dump this ice and let's get started. So before we go any further, this is I'd like to keep it an open dialogue. So if folks have any questions, we can either save it for the end or fire away. So what we're going to be doing today is doing some stir fry. It's just something really quick and easy. I'd like to start with like a vegetable oil, something that is high heat, grapeseed, vegetable, a lot of those stuff is really good. You're going to see, I just turned this thing on and we're already sauteing. And again, I just had ice in this thing. So it doesn't take much to really get going. A little bit of salt to help draw out some of the moisture. And again, cooking through the towel. So that means I won't have to clean up as much later when I inevitably make a mess. So we talked a lot about carbon monoxide and things of that nature, but I wanted to throw out another little stat for you all. Typical outdoor concentrations of carbon monoxide are anywhere from 0.03 to 2.5 parts per million. The federal standards dictate that you cannot exceed 9 parts per million, which means that if it reaches that level, the government comes in, everyone goes inside until they figure out what to do with the source of the contamination, figure it out, stop it, and then punish whoever made that happen. But when we cook with natural gas in our home, to back this down, we can far exceed 200 parts per million. So there are no current indoor air quality standards in the United States. So the only place that we can look to understand where should we be at is to our neighbors in the north, in Canada. And they say that you cannot have indoor air quality, you cannot have carbon monoxide exceed 10 parts per million in your indoor space over the course of 24 hours. And in cooking, we are exceeding that by a factor of 20. So when I talk about how sick we would get as chefs, I'm convinced it was less heat and more the pollution that we were putting ourselves in. There's a lot of byproduct that we're putting ourselves in harm's way for. And you can say, yeah, well, like you have the hood system up top. The truth is that we are still directly over top that burner. The hood is going to do a great job of capturing everything that's going to go beyond that. But we're still affected by all of that. And when we talk about efficiency, the gas range at best, we're talking at lab conditions, somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 to 35% efficient. So for every dollar or therm of gas, you are not burning, wasting 65% of that at best. Truth be told, in the hands of a chef, we don't run the equipment like the scientists do. And in fact, we will be somewhere in the neighborhood of the 20s, high teens.
Hey, Chef Chris.
Releasing energy. Can you hear me?
Go ahead.
Yeah. There are a couple questions for you in the chat. Do you mind if I ask them?
Sure. I'm all done.
Okay. One is, can you talk a little bit about the what kinds of pans you should use with an induction stove?
So induction stoves use pans that are able to attract the magnet. So if you want to know if your stove is ready to, if your pan is ready to go, grab your refrigerator magnet and put it on the bottom. If it sticks, you're good to go. So if you have cast iron, that's amazing. Honestly, it's easier to tell you what doesn't stick to induction, and that would be pure copper pans and pure aluminum pans. So that's really about it. So if you're a restaurateur accustomed to buying cheap aluminum pans, which truth be told doesn't hold up to fire, let alone induction, it's not going to work. If you love pure copper pans, they make copper pans that have a sandwiched bottom that is able to get hot with induction, and you can do that. But for the most part, most of your stainless steel, your all-clad, which is what I was just cooking on, everything is already induction ready because it's easier for these manufacturers to produce one type of pot as opposed to induction ready or not induction ready. So it's a lot easier for them to just have one type, and therefore most of them's ready to go. Any other questions out there?
And can you explain why you put the towel under the pot?
Yeah, I didn't want to make a mess. I, like most Americans, hate having to clean up the kitchen after. So it's nice to put down a towel and do something where you're gonna be making splatter, and just turn it on and go. And it's also to show and highlight how there are no thermal sources of heat with induction. So I was able to grab the pan with my hand. The towel was able to be on there without catching on fire, just to highlight the safety aspect of it. So more show, and also the effect is that I don't have to clean as much, less than its actual functional. Any other questions?
Can you talk a little bit about the difference between an induction stove and like an electric smooth top stove?
Yeah, so the way electric resistive works is you are taking in energy in the form of electricity, and you then have to convert that into heat energy, which then gets to take its time to get into the metal. And then after that, once it's in the metal, it gets into the food. When you are cooking with induction, what's happening is you're having a tightly wound copper coil, you're sending energy in, and instantly creating what's called an eddy current. So as it's going around and around, it's creating oscillating magnetic current, which if you think of your microwave at home, turn on, it sends these microwaves into your food, it excites the water molecules, so they get all happy, they're bouncing around, they're creating molecular friction, which heats your food up from the inside out. We're doing that by putting by creating an electromagnetic field that is oscillating the ferromagnetic qualities in the pan, and thus creating that molecular friction. And because the metallic ions are so linear, we're able to get energy quickly in and out, which is why we're able to get something that is a frozen pan to saute in literal seconds, when with gas, we're much, much slower. I can boil water in about 90 seconds. With gas, it might take me about 4 minutes. So that's the level of efficiency that we're talking here. Now, there are other things that I would call myths that that I love to bust. The first is that you can't create quality food without gas. That's not true. In fact, the Culinary Olympics is all electric. The Bocuse d'Or is all electric. There are restaurants like Noma, which is the #1 restaurant in the world. That's all electric. There's tons of them all on the planet that high profile chefs are. In fact, most of the top 50 restaurants in the world use electric. Most new restaurants in Hong Kong are all electric. So the idea that you can't produce traditional cooking like wok cooking or tandoor ovens or anything like that without gas is simply not true. The truth is that if we were that concerned about traditional ways of cooking, we would be still cooking with coal and wood. The fact that our techniques were able to transition from coal and wood to gas and now to induction just furthers the point that cooking is about fundamentals and technique and not about your fuel source. So there may be chefs that say, listen, I cannot go further without gas. Like my recipes are made for gas, which knowing that it's an odorless, colorless gas that we're putting out. In fact, they have to put chemicals into it to make it smell like something. It's kind of a farce to say that gas puts flavor into food. It doesn't. Your technique as a chef does. So a braise, whether on a campfire or your induction range, is always a braise. It's always a saute. It's always a bake. Those fundamentals don't change.
Can you explain? Yeah. Can you explain a little bit about how to decide what heat settings to use on an induction stove?
You mean like how high to put it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so when I'm training folks, I always have to begin by reversing the thought process. That you need to start high, right? Unless you know how hot and how much energy you need, I always tell folks start low and then ramp up so you understand how much power you're getting into. A wonderful example of that is our friends at Microsoft. When we were working with them on this project, they wanted to put induction woks in. So we worked with the company to develop custom woks just for Microsoft. And the chef said, I want as much power as I can get into that wok, because he didn't think that induction or electric cooking had enough power. So the company obliged. And then when they went to test it, cranked it on high, and it literally melted the wok. Now, I'm not saying that your home or your restaurant induction is going to do that. Most of the time, we're looking at 3.5 kilowatts per burner or 5 kilowatts. If you're in the residential space, you're probably looking at around 2.5 kilowatts. But the truth is, it's more than enough power, and we are able to get more energy into the food. So, your 30,000 BTU gas range, you're getting about 10,000 BTUs into the food. Your 5 kilowatt induction range, you're getting 14,000 BTUs into the food. If you go into Asian cuisine with wok cooking, that 100,000 BTU wok is only getting 20,000 BTUs into the food. The 12 kilowatt wok is getting 35,000 BTUs into the food. So because of that, we are, with induction, able to nearly double our throughput. So we're able to cook 70.9 pounds of food with this induction, as opposed to 38.6 pounds of food with its gas counterpart. And it's going to take a lot less time to clean, so I don't have to purchase harmful chemicals or anything of that nature. Hot soapy water is all it takes. You wipe it, you move on. If you spill cream, it's not going to burn on you. You just wipe it off. In fact, this is on right now, and nothing is getting hot because there's no metal on it. So it's safer. So if you were to pull off your pan and forget to turn it off, because there's no pan, it's not going to hurt you. So it's an additional safety as well. And,
Pretty amazing.
Yeah, there are also a conversation to be had about cost. That's one that everyone is always going to think about. Electricity, people think costs more than gas. Right now, well, there was a quick little study done where they just wanted to see how much, like a gas versus electric comparison. And there were some assumptions made. If you were running your kitchen for 360 days a year, 15 hours a day, and you had your gas at $1 per thermos, $1 per 100,000 BTUs, or your induction at 17 cents per kilowatt hour, you would see a cost of about $1,123 a year to operate your gas range, and $1,114 a year to operate your induction range. Now, this isn't to say I'm going to save you $9 a year by going with induction, so spend the extra money. It's to really highlight the myth, truly, that gas is much cheaper than electric. The truth is that when that study was done, there was the national average about $1 per therm. Now it's over $2. So this year alone, gas has doubled in cost. The national average for electricity is somewhere around 14.5. So 14.5 cents per kilowatt hour. It changes depending on where you are. The truth is, electricity costs are a lot more stable than gas costs. That's just a fact. Gas is the infrastructure is failing. We're seeing. I saw numbers up to 65% of the infrastructure needs to be updated and fixed because we're leaking so much methane. And methane, as we all know, is a greenhouse gas emission that is 85 times greater. That has 80 times that has 85 times greater of an impact on our environment than does CO2. It just doesn't stay in the atmosphere as long. So these are true harms that we're seeing. And these are little things that we can do.
That's great. That's really helpful information. I
course.
wonder, is there a learning curve to using an induction stove comparable to electric and gas, or?
I'd love to say yes, because for Forward Dining Solutions, we offer trainings, but truth be told, it's super, super small, because people know how to cook, right? It's intuitive to know how to cook. We know when something's burning. We know when something's too hot, too cold, and we should add more heat, add more sauce, add more oil, whatever the case is. We can see when something's sticking and burning or not. So we don't really need a flame to tell us how hot something is. So once you understand the power that's in your hand, and really once or twice is all it takes, then you have an idea of how to cook with it, and then you are off to the races. I've trained staff, my own staff, that were not trained chefs. Some of them had come out of prison or were just, home cooks that wanted a part-time job, and they all picked it up super quick and super easy. No issues at all. And I'll also say, if there's any professionals out there watching, that America, we are about 30 or so years behind our brothers and sisters overseas. And when I talked about some examples of the highest levels cooking on induction, it's just to highlight how the international community has made this the standard that we test and we compete. This is the international standard for how good of a chef is. This is what they use. They don't have this person on gas, that person on grill, that person on saute. They have the identical kitchens, all induction. And then that's how they judge who's the best on the planet. So that's what the international community is doing. We are still arguing about how to get a piece of metal hot to see how far behind we are.
That's really interesting, because you do often hear that, gas cooking is a superior form of cooking. And in fact, it sounds like what you're saying is that a lot of the professional chefs, especially overseas, are already really adopting this technology.
Yeah. It just makes more sense for your operation. If you were to walk into my kitchen years ago, before I became an evangelist, if you will, and say, hey, would you like to switch to induction? I would have said absolutely not. But then if they had said, would you like to reduce the cost of chemical purchases? Would you like to reduce the temperature of your kitchen, which reduces your overall energy consumption because now you're not using as much energy to cool down your building? Would you like to reduce the amount of waste that you're having, reduce all these things? Reduce your water, because like if I had a walk, that's about 1 million gallons of water per year I'm saving by going to induction. Then I'd say, yeah, no brainer, of course. Would you like to reduce cleanup time so that way your staff can get out faster? Would you like to double the amount of food you can produce so now your staff is now able to produce a lot more food to handle the demand of your consumers? And right now, in a climate in which we are dealing with historically low participation rates in the hospitality industry, these are all things that are like, yeah, absolutely. How do we do that? This is how we do it. This answers all of that. And it's crazy. And I always say, never listen to folks who are trying to say one thing will fix everything. But this honestly is one thing that will not fix everything, but will help tremendously in getting our industry back on track and reducing the pollution rates. Because right now, the number one cause of the number one polluter in any city is the building, is the built environment. San Francisco, 77% of the emissions come from buildings. New York is 70%. Excuse me, I'm gonna skip over that word. 70%. So, and we know that the average EUI of a building, like an office building, is 30. We also know that the average energy use intensity of a kitchen is about 325. So the addition of a kitchen increases energy consumption of a building by nearly 10 times or over 10 times, which is going to be the biggest polluter of any building program. So kitchens have to be looked at in order to reduce the building emissions, and it also has to be looked at for the home, because if we know that childhood asthma, as Stephanie was talking about, is an issue, We know that it's a $50 billion a year healthcare cost for American families. We know that 43% of what causes childhood asthma is environmental factors. Why wouldn't we remove the pollutants that are in our homes? And that is the open flame.
Yeah, so like what you're hitting on there is that not only is this a really great cooking experience, in your opinion, but really can be part of this overall effort that we know we need to do, which is moving away from these high intensity, high emitting appliances in our homes, which, you know, include cooking, and which we know is both a problem for indoor air quality, but then also ultimately the other gas burning and fossil fuel burning appliances that contribute to outdoor air pollution as well.
Of course. If I can say one more thing, if you look around your home right now, you would probably see three things that are gas: your HVAC, your hot water tank, and your gas range. Everything else is electrified. So really, you're only talking about a couple more things to get there. You're almost there, just a couple more things.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, it's a process, and that's what I always tell people. Like, you know, it can seem overwhelming. It can seem like a lot when you look at the whole thing, but if you look at it as a process, and you start to think about over time, what am I saving and how am I taking it step by step? That's how it becomes manageable, and that's how you can do it. Okay. Chef Chris, thanks so much. The food looks really good. I'm really sad that I'm not there with you to try it.
They'll be able to tell you if it's any good.
Okay. I really appreciate you showing us how to use the induction stove, and you know, I think it's an option for people if you're looking at kitchen upgrades. The electric smooth top as well, they work a little differently than induction. You're not going to be able to put your hands on them, so don't try that if you don't have an induction stove.
Don't touch it. Rule of thumb.
Yeah. But thanks again, Chef Chris. And I want to say thank you to everybody. I know there were more questions in the question and answer that we didn't have time to get to live. We'll try to answer those afterwards. We'll also be sending out the recording with some additional resources and the links that we talked about. And we're really glad everyone was able to join us today. And thanks again. This is you know, this is an important issue and part of a movement to build a cleaner and healthier America. And one last thing I want to mention is that if you're looking to take some sort of action on this issue, I mentioned earlier our new report about retailers and the kinds of information that consumers are getting when they're shopping. We are calling on those retailers to do a better job. It's really an opportunity for them to help protect their consumers. And if you'd like to take action and ask one of those major retailers, which is Best Buy, you can go ahead and click this link and take an action, and we'll send a note to Best Buy. We're hoping to work with them and the other retailers on creating programs to protect their consumers from gas stove pollution.
I can also jump in on that note and say that if you go to forwarddiningsolutions.com, under the resource tab, there's a link to the decarbonization guide that was put together by the William J. Worthy Foundation. That is the most comprehensive guide written on the subject of building decarbonization. Chapter 5 specifically talks about kitchens. So if you have questions that you don't think was answered, go there. I guarantee you that it will be answered. It is a 100% free resource, and I encourage anybody to share that around.
Great. So people can check that out as well. Okay. Thank you, Chef Chris. Thank you, Dr. Lee. Thank you to Commissioner Trumka, and thanks to all of our attendees, and have a great day and a happy holiday season.
Take care, everybody. Cook safe.